just like how I started out and how I got to here, basically.
Yeah.
So the very beginning, I started playing poker without even poker chips. We played with like Lego chips in my friend's attic. We didn't even have like a real poker sit, and we just played for fun. That was when I first started playing poker. I would have been probably like 15. Then in university, I deposited $50 on, I think it was Full Tilt at the time, spun it up to around like $700 pretty quickly, playing 9 max sit and goes, but had no idea what I was doing. Like, just, was basically getting lucky. And then I remember just like seeing cash games, and I'd played those with my friends. So I was like, maybe I'll give those a shot. Started playing 50 and L. So I only had like 12 buy-ins in the account, and very quickly lost it all. I think I spun it up a little bit, lost it all. And then basically went bust, and just was but was very interested in the game. So I started just like Googling stuff, looking for resources online to study. Found, I think it was called Card Runners at the time, started watching some of their content, and then found a website that would give you $50 for free to play. It was like pokerstrategy.com. I don't know if they still exist, but anyways, they gave me $50 to play for free. And after that, I never had to redeposit. So I started playing 10 and L with that bankroll. Would just basically move up whenever I was basically playing a 20 buy-in bankroll management. So every time I got to about 20 buy-ins, I would move up. And I did that while I was in university until I was basically playing like 100 L pretty regularly while I was studying. I probably didn't move up as much as I should have. I was beating 100 L at the time for like 12 to 15 big blinds per 100. And I was just kind of, just enjoying having this kind of side hustle while I was going through school, making like a steady income. But then after that, went back to I graduated university, got a job for a few years, and kind of stepped away from poker for a while. But I got to a point where I wasn't really enjoying the work I was doing. So I moved to Toronto to look for work. And while I was looking for work, I just started playing poker again, and just kind of was like, hey, why don't I just give this a shot? Did the whole Twitch thing for a bit as well. So I was streaming, playing 100 L at the time. Started doing coaching as well at that point, and using kind of my Twitch channel to advertise that. Moved up to 200 Zoom, was playing that for a bit. And while I was coaching, so a student reached out to me through my Twitch channel. I started coaching him, and he is now actually one of the coaches I work with in the CFP. People have probably seen his content in my channel. His name's Andrew Ivers. A Ivers was his PokerStars name. So we started working together, and with the other two head coaches as well, Connor and Gary, and we just pretty quickly we were always talking strategy. We'd always be on calls like this, like post sessions. What do you think of this hand? What do you think of that hand? Reviewing each other's hands. And within about a year of working with each other, we had all moved up from whatever stake it was at the time. I think some of us were playing 100, some of us were playing 200. And within a year, we were all playing minimum stake 500. It started to play like 1K and 2K, and just, playing a lot higher stakes. And so the biggest thing I took away from that was that, you get a lot farther in this game if you don't try and do it all on your own. It's a tough game to learn on your own, so it's good to have people to study with and bounce ideas off of, to tell you right, tell you you're wrong, that type of stuff. Yeah, so this is something I used to preach a lot. I still do to my students. It's like, try and get the most of whatever resources you have available to you. So I've had people ask me like, I don't have a ton of money to invest in poker. How do I get better? And what I used to do was I used to be very persistent and very on top. I would make sure that whenever I'm watching a video, I call it like active watching, as in like it's very easy to put on any poker content and kind of do some lazy studying. Just put on a play and explain, just kind of watch it. You're not really thinking that deeply though. You're just kind of like looking for like the big pots and stuff. You just want the exciting spots, right? So what I always used to do was make sure whenever I was watching, the play and explains and Card Runners at the time, that was most of my studying at that time, was just watching better players play, whether that would be opening up tables in the client and like seeing what the high stakes guys were doing without any hole cards, obviously, or watching videos. That would just allow me to like kind of predict what the person was going to do. So I would see a hand and I would think, okay, if this was me, I would, I would raise, I would bet this size, that type of thing. And then whenever the coach would do something different, whoever was playing in the video, I would, think about, okay, like why is that better, or is that better? And, just really challenge and just work on more of my thought process. Because poker as a whole at that point was more, you didn't really think of ranges. You didn't really think of, this board has X bet size. Like, you kind of just try to outplay your opponent in every spot. Like, it was more of just like a mind game where like you knew like the standard play would be, a lot of c betting, just like bet sizes on flop where like you only used half pot or 2/3, or in 3-bet pots you only really c bet half pot. That was just kind of like how people thought at the time. And then once you started doing different things, you realize you could just put people in uncomfortable spots. So I think this is something that's carried on with me even after like the solver era. Is I've always been pretty good at hand reading, just trying to like understand the story my opponent's telling and then put together whether or not that makes sense. And I think the solvers have actually just kind of helped this skill, because now it's a lot easier to visualize like what does their entire range look like, what different sizes should they be using in theory in this spot, and have they deviated in any point in the hand, and when they deviate, is this something that I expect them to do with a stronger range than equilibrium would, or a weaker range, and those type of things. So yeah, like at the start, it was mainly just watching a lot of content. My wife can attest to this. I watched a lot of poker in like the early years of my career. I still enjoy watching. Like, I like to watch some of the areas I'm less familiar with. I watch all like tournament stuff, and now I watch less of the cash game stuff now. But yeah, so I would watch a lot of content, and then obviously, as I mentioned, working with other people was really helpful for me. So working with the other three head coaches that I met up with, like, that's important. If you don't have access to solvers, or especially if you can't afford, say, one on your own, get together with some guys. Maybe you can, pay for something together and work together with that, solver. Maybe you only need one on the computer. You can screen share and then do that type of stuff too. So that's a lot of what we did, was just, working together on calls all the time. And that transition from when we first started working together, we weren't really using solvers. It was just reviewing each other's. One thing that actually was really useful when I first started studying with people, that I would strongly recommend for anyone, again, especially like early in your career when you're not really, the solver's not that important. You want to just develop on your understanding of the game and just like getting all the fundamental stuff down. Was we would take turns recording a session of ourselves playing, and then you would send the link to one of your friends that you study with, and they would just type out notes based on every, like, timestamp notes on the plane explain. So they would watch your video and say, at 5 minutes and 55 seconds, you had pocket fives and you c-bet this board. I would do this, or why did you do this? And now you've created a spot where you can discuss how each person thinks of that spot. And you can see if there's differences, and maybe one of the two people has a stronger idea, or maybe both have some input that can be really useful. So that's a really good tool for anyone who doesn't have, who wants to study for cheap. You just find someone to just, take turns exchanging, reviewing each other's play. I did a lot of that early on. I also used to do, when I played in like the 100 NL Zoom pool for a while, I went through a stage where I would take all the best regulars, or all the guys I played against the most, and I would spend a day kind of just going through their stats in my head and just trying to see, what are their tendencies. I would also like look through showdowns, because at that time I was still using like Hold'em Manager 2. So I would look at their stats, see if there's any like obvious things that I should be aware of in their game. But then on top of that, I would just look for all the showdowns I've seen with them and just see tendencies in the showdowns, because showdowns tell a lot. Sometimes showdowns will tell a lot more than the cards, because you can see, a hand that they, didn't value bet, that was definitely a value bet, didn't bluff, that was definitely a bluff, certain tendencies, bet sizes, these type of things. So I used to do that, and I had like I would make a document on my computer, like a Word document, that would just say like the player's name, potential exploits, notes from their showdown, and I would just like do that for, I only probably did it for like 5 to 10 guys, because then I started moving up, and it became like, I found this became less useful. But it is a good thing if you're playing in the same game for a long time, especially the people who play in like smaller pools. It's definitely worth some time to just like, really study the opponents you play against on a regular basis. And then, yeah, as I moved into solver, I think the solver era nowadays, I think a lot of my study just kind of comes through my coaching. So as I mentioned, I run a CFP with the 3 other guys. So a lot of times just preparing content for them, it's kind of helping me study myself. This is something all the coaches have echoed, that they've all felt their game has improved a lot just by having to create stuff for other people. Because it's one thing to understand yourself. It's another thing to put that into words, and create content that makes it clear to your students. So just, coming up with like kind of a curriculum, being like, hey, we're going to work on this month just blind versus blind, or just 3-bet pots out of position, and then that really helps you focus in on one spot and just like improve that, piece by piece, because it's hard. There's so many things in poker you can study at any given moment, so it's really good to have some direction and just focus on one area and really round out your entire game. So nowadays I don't do as much of the like individual assessment of my game. I still do. I still like review with my the coaches I work with, but I would, again, a very good technique to do for this is if you're in the area where you're starting to use a solver. One thing that I suggest is it's very easy to get lost in the weeds. There's so many things you can look at in a solver. It's not always going to give you the most important outputs. So one thing that I suggest is if you really want to find the most valuable areas, is when you're playing a session, have a notepad off to the side. And whenever a spot comes up that you're unsure of, just make like a quick note. So an example of this could be, you c-bet flop, your opponent check raises, and then you face a bet on the turn. Just say like facing flop check raise, face barrel on turn, that type of thing. Type that out. And then especially if you feel uncomfortable in that spot, right? You face a bet on the turn, you're like, I don't really know what my continuing range should look like in this spot, or something to that extent. So write that note out. And then every time that spot comes up, put a mark beside that spot. So say it comes up again, just type a 1 next to it. And do this for every spot that comes up at like where you're we'll say lost. And then at the end of your session, you'll have markings beside each of them. And the spot that comes up the most often is usually going to be the area that's most important for your game to study. So it's a good way to really know, because after a session, a lot of times, you'll want to be like, did I play this 4-bet pot right? Because it was a huge pot and it was button versus big blind, and it was a huge pot, but it's like, it's a 4-bet pot. They don't happen that often. Obviously they're important, but a lot of these other spots will come up so much more often, and ranges are a lot more narrow, a lot more wide, and it's a lot more important to get those spots right due to how often they come up and how much more complex they are. A lot of times 4-bet pots kind of play themselves. Ranges are strong, the SPR is low, the money's going to get in, but they feel so important because the pots are so large, and losing 100 big blinds, 150 big blinds, that kind of sits with you. And they definitely, 3-bet pots and 4-bet pots are very important. I'm not trying to discredit those, but it's a good area to find, a good technique to just find those areas very quickly that require additional focus, to make sure that you're using your study time the most efficiently. So that's something I did for quite some time as well. Again, some of these techniques I don't have as much time for these days. A lot of my studying comes through the teaching, but these are some techniques that I would suggest for people who are trying to improve their game.
Yeah.
So I would say I was fortunate that the only time I've ever gone broke from poker was when I had that $50 initial roll, went up to like 700 and lost it all. It's kind of a good thing that was the only time, because you see how quickly an entire bankroll can go away. So if it made me conservative, again, maybe too conservative some points, but I never put myself in situations where I was, say, stressed with my bankroll basically because of that. I never put myself in a spot where I was taking a shot that if I lose too many buy-ins, it kind of sets me back too far. I was pretty conservative with my shot taking. Again, I stayed 100L for too long. By the time I was playing 200L, I was severely overrolled. But that doesn't change the fact that poker could be tough. You're going to go through big swings, and this is something like, the best players still go on long break-even sessions. The best players have really bad sessions. I mean, one that I always show my students is, I've had people ask like, what's the biggest downswing you've been on? I don't know the exact biggest downswing I've been on, but I tell them that I've had a session, an individual session. So it was like 4,000 hands, and I lost 35 buy-ins in that session. So I don't know if I've heard of a session that's that bad from anyone else. So people talk about downswings. Like, I'm on a 20 buy-in downswing. I'm on a 30 buy-in downswing. It's like, I've had a session that was minus 35 buy-ins. Like, I don't really I try not to think in like upswings and downswings because things can happen very quickly in either direction. I'm more just trying. So I think it's one of my skills that I've always tried to focus on. Just do I still think I'm playing well? When I lost that 35 buy-ins, I probably wasn't playing my best, right? It's hard to lose that many buy-ins, but I've reviewed the session. It was a pretty epic session. So I've reviewed it, and like for how good of a player I was at the time, it was probably like 3 or 4 years ago now. I don't think I did anything terrible. I don't think I was like playing awful. I just got a ton of bad card distribution. But from that point, I ended up going on like I think like a 3-month break even stretch, 4-month break even stretch. And this was also the year that I got married. I went on a honeymoon, and I had this biggest like downswing I've ever had right before all of that. So that was a pretty tough stretch. It was like 3 or 4 months where I've pretty recently moved up to 500 now, and I lose 35 buy-ins in one session. I remember I walked out of my office, and my wife walked past me, and I was just like, oh, I just lost $17,000. And she like, I said it so kind of nonchalantly and walked past her. She thought I had said I lost 1,700, just like based in the numbers she had heard from a winning or losing session before. And then kind of did like a double take, and she was like, wait, did you say 17,000? I was like, yep. And so I just like, I took my dog, went for a walk, and just kind of like cleared my head. But like those sessions suck, obviously, and everyone's going to go through. Hopefully, no one else has to go through a session that bad. But you're going to go through some really rough sessions, and that's why I think having people to work with has always been really important, because when you're going through tough stretches, even the best players can start to have doubt. I've been a winning player for the entirety of my career, so whatever it's been now, 7-8 years, and I'll still have moments where less so now, but moments in my career where you go on this 100K break even stretch or 200K break even stretch of hands played, and you start has everyone figured me out? Those type of doubts start to set in. So I think it's really important to have a group of people to work with, because whenever you have these sessions, you can have them review entire sessions or just individual hand histories where you lose a stack or whatever it may be. But ask the player, what would you do? And if your thoughts keep aligning and they're still doing well, then that can kind of help you like get rid of that doubt, which it's really important to never let doubt set in, because you need. I always say, like, when you're playing the tables, play with confidence, study with uncertainty. Don't have uncertainty when you're at the table. Like, don't doubt your plays when you're at the table, because that's really gonna just affect your play, and it has no benefit. So you can obviously be curious and make notes, as I talked about. When you're playing, be confident in yourself and save that uncertainty for when you're studying, because that'll make sure that you don't let any of that doubt, affect your play, or prevent you from pulling the trigger in spots that maybe are a good spot to pull the trigger. But yeah, with respect to the swings, I think it is probably one of the toughest things to deal with in poker, because no matter how good you are, you're always going to have these stretches where it's kind of out of your control. The cards are just really bad. So I think it's really important to have those like checks in place where if you're on your own going through a downswing, that's got to be tough. And I know there's a lot of people out there who do that. So yeah, try not to just do it all on your own. Try and have some people to work with, whether that be a Discord group, or just anyone you can meet, any thread, just people to have. Obviously, you want to surround yourself. I was very fortunate that the 3 guys I work with were all very thought like I did. We're all very driven, and we all had kind of natural success at poker, so that helps. You want to make sure you're working with the right people. You really don't want to work with people that hold you back, that don't have the same work ethic as you, who don't have the same goals as you. You want to work with people that really are trying to make to that next level. Or maybe you're not. Maybe you just want to be the best 50-0 reg or 100-0. Maybe you're really comfortable. Then again, find people who are looking to do that as well. That'll really help your study process and keep your sanity in check when you go through the ups and the downs.
Sorry.
Yeah. So for usually when we take on new students, everyone loves to look at these sexy graphs that have these huge just red lines that are soaring, and nobody wants to have that embarrassing graph where your red line is just plummeting. And usually when we take on students, it is the plummeting red line. And it's not like it's our goal to be like, all right, we're gonna just flip this red line around and you're gonna just be a red line warrior. But typically, what that's an indication of just like overfolding, not bluffing enough, that type of thing, right? So usually, I think passivity as a whole. So you could almost say that's the personality trait and the poker trait that are the biggest leaks is usually passivity. Not bluffing enough, folding too much, and like most humans are not very aggressive by nature. We're like relative, like we don't really want conflict. We don't really want confrontation. So I think like that, those kind of go together. I'm a pretty passive person by nature too. Like, it's basically only when I'm at the tables that I'm really fighting for every pot where that side of me really comes in. I'm a competitive person, but, and I think that's something you definitely see in the most successful students we've had. The people who've kind of moved up quickly are people who have some sort of competitive background typically. We've had a fair amount of people that we've worked with who were former professional gamers, and that's actually transferred over quite well. And you can see the similarities. You're trying to outthink your opponent. You're playing long hours in front of a computer. There's lots of skill sets in there, like basically the passivity, and then that made me realize another thing is also just the willingness to grind. Like if you really want to make it a poker, you got to be able to just like sit in front of your computer and grind it out for hours at a time, especially early in your career. It's really important. Like, you don't want to burn yourself out. There's obviously a work-life balance or a poker life balance that you need, but you have to be able to just sit in front of the computer, whatever that may be. For me, I'm able to just play a super long session without a break. Like I could play probably 7-8 hours, no break, and I'm fine. Like I think probably one of my biggest strengths is I can play for a long time, a lot of tables, and I'm not going to be the sharpest on hour 7th and 8th as I was on hour 1 or 2, but I can play 7-8 hours and be 80% of what I was. I've had scenarios where I'm playing a long session. I'm playing like 8 tables. 2 of them are heads up, and one of the guys I've been playing heads up, and he's played me for a while, left, come back. And he's actually typed in the chat like, "Dude, how are you still playing? Like we were playing hours ago. Like my brain's mush." And it's like I think that's probably one of my strongest suits is that I can just play those long sessions, and it really doesn't affect my play as much as others. So that's obviously that's pretty uncommon. Most people want breaks and need breaks, and I think that's healthy. I think it's good to like a lot of times people play play for a couple hours, take a break, come back, play again. I think that's good. But again, if you really want to succeed at poker, you can't just play 2 hours a day and call it a day. Play 3 hours a day. You need to treat it like a job. You need to be putting in at least 40 hours a week. If you can't play 40 hours a week, then you need to be studying the rest of that time. But you need to be investing at least 40 hours a week. I would think early in my career it was much more than that, especially because I was playing during the day and then streaming at night. So I was playing, say probably it was like 10 to 12 hours of poker at least 5 days a week. But I would think overall, coming back to the initial question, the idea of these weaknesses, I think like passivity is a big thing. Like don't overfold and don't be afraid to pull the trigger. People can obviously run with that too far and and that's where a coach comes in. You help you find that middle ground where you don't want to let people run you over, but you also don't want to be trying to run people over in every spot. You have to find that balance. So we really try and give our students like a metric of how to gauge themselves to make sure that they're not overfolding. We do like stat checkers where we'll look at their whole stats as a whole and find those areas like you're overfolding here, you're not betting enough here, that type of stuff. So passivity and then unwillingness to just put those long, hard hours in. If you can't grind, this industry isn't for you, especially if you want to be like I was going to say, especially if you want to be a cash game grinder, but MTTs are the same. Like the hours are different. Your days could be longer, but less frequent or whatever it may be. But the idea is still the same, that you just have to be able to sit in front of your computer and just like be willing to play. Or if you're a live player, sit at the table and just play for hours. And put the work in. So work ethic and passivity, I think, would be the 2 biggest weaknesses early on that we try and help people adjust. Yeah, as I talked about, like having some sort of competitive drive and experience in the competitive industry, in something competitive is always, I think, carried over. So that's always like you have to want it. You can't just, if you're joining a CFB because you want them to give you the magic pill that just I do this in every spot and I win money. It's not how it works. It's like, we're going to give you tools, but you have to put the work, you have to be able to use those tools. So you got to put the work in as well. So that competitive drive is super important. The willingness to play the long hours, and the ability to be coached. Not everyone is great at being coached. So we've had students who, they join our program. They're currently a losing 50 and L player, break even 50 and L player, and we're trying to tell them things, and we keep hearing, but in my games, this, this doesn't work. These players don't bluff enough, or whatever it may be. So instead of absorbing what we're telling them, they're just fighting us at every point. So if you want to be coached, and if basically, like, you could think we're bad coaches, you're entitled to think that, right? If you join the program, you think we're bad coaches. But the thing is, if you're joining our program, it's because you like the content we've created. And in these scenarios, it's not like they're telling us we don't enjoy your content, or we don't think you're a good coach. They're just like fighting you at every point as if it's just wrong, right? And so if you have sought someone out and you respect their game and they're showing you results, then you have to be willing to take their criticism and take their suggestions and at least experiment with them. So the students that we've had to either cut ties with, who have left the program, are the ones who just didn't want to listen. They were doing their own things. They're currently struggling at 50 and 100 and whatever it may be, but they're still fighting us at every point. So don't be too proud, basically. Like, I've had a lot of scenarios where something I believed has turned out to be wrong, and it's made me a better player. So if you can listen to other people that are better or worse than you, I mean, if someone's telling you some strategy, whether they're better or worse than you, it has value. Because if they're worse than you and they're giving you bad advice, then you at least get to hear how someone who plays poorly thinks of the game. And that's a valuable skill, because then you start to think, oh, okay, so like, they're making this mistake and it's because they think of the game like this. So you should be able to listen to any advice and then yourself be able to determine, okay, is this good or bad advice? And so when you combine those three, those our most successful students have been the ones who can just, put the work in, are very coachable. They show up to all of our sessions like ready to learn. They participate, they ask questions, they just really absorb all of the content. So the competitiveness, the work ethic, and that ability to listen, I think those are the ability to take coaching advice well. Those have been the students that have just moved up the stakes the quickest and have had the most success. Yeah, if you're playing 25 and L, 15, like any of the lower stakes, and like you're really motivated and you just like kind of want my advice. So the first thing would be that figure out what you're willing to spend to make yourself better. Do you have like, if you don't have a ton of money to invest in yourself right now, like whether that be it's tied up in poker or whatever it may be, and you're looking for the most affordable way, I would say, get yourself in that Discord group, find people to.
Sorry.
Yep.
I don't get it. Yeah, sorry.
Good?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, so I would say get yourself in a Discord group or something where you're working with other people, because now you have pooled resources. I think that's really important. Now you can put money together and buy a solver together. And again, you just need one computer to run that, whatever it may be. But starting out, I would think you want to have something where you're just watching better players on a regular basis. I think when you're first starting out, or if you're just trying to make that jump, it's always important to see what people who have had success are doing that you're not. So I don't think it's super important early on, especially if you are unfamiliar with it, to just spend like endless hours with a solver. I think it's good to just, watch players that are better to you, get a subscription. I do coaching content for Upswing, get a subscription for a month to Upswing and just watch Play and Explains, right? Just watch I've done some modules on there as well. There's specific, but if you're 25 and L, 15 L, usually you just want to start with just what is someone who's had a lot of success in this game doing. So watch the Play and Explains actively. Just really focus in on what are they doing in every spot. And then once you've done that for a while, once you start really seeing, what are the spots that I'm missing, this will give you some guidance again. Like you'll see like, oh, you're betting a lot in this spot. You're using this spot. You're using this size in that spot, that type of thing. And then from there, you'll have some guidance on where to study. Also, I would assume most people nowadays, if you're playing 25 and 50 like say regular, like you're really trying to make it work, you have access to some pre-flop ranges. But I would think like being the best at pre-flop in your games, whether that be 25 and 50 whatever it be, like just being really sound pre-flop is going to give you a huge edge. A lot of mistakes come from people just making massive pre-flop mistakes. And that's pretty easy to study on your own. It doesn't require a lot of investment. You can get ranges. You don't even necessarily need the best ranges, right? There's a lot of ranges out there. Get yourself some pre-flop ranges and just spend, you could, it wouldn't even be the worst idea to spend just a month on pre-flop. Just all you care about is just getting your pre-flop down, so you never have to use any mental energy in that spot. Like, is this a 3-bet? Is this an open? It's just, without even thinking, you just know all your pre-flop spots, at least the baseline. Obviously, you're going to need to deviate based on players, but it's like if you just have that baseline down, then you don't have to waste any mental bandwidth when you're playing. You can just immediately just know that this is a 3-bet, this is an open, this is a fold, and this allows you to make more decisions more efficiently. It'll allow you at some point, if it's your goal, to add more tables. I don't always encourage, like, not everyone needs to play 8 tables at a time. Sometimes 3 is the max. For some people 2 is your max. Just find that sweet spot. So get your pre-flop down, watch a lot of better players, and then if you get to a point where you think, okay, like I want to do more solver work, I think at that point you either want to watch a video that just talks about how to get the most out of solvers. There's some courses available out there, or potentially hire a coach, potentially join a CFP if that's the right fit for you. Obviously, I run a CFP, so there's a lot of benefit to those, because the same question you're having is, there's people who are doing well at 25, 50 but they're having issues making it to the next level. And having someone show you how to study is really important. If I can show you like the most efficient way to use a solver, whereas you're not just putting in random inputs, looking at the output and being like, oh, I should do this, right? Like that is very inefficient and takes a lot of time. So I would honestly encourage, if you haven't had anyone experienced or haven't watched any content on using a solver, you're probably wasting your time using it, especially if you're playing 25 and 50 right now. So that's not to say you can't get a lot out of it at those stakes. It's just, if you're less experienced with it, then it can actually set you back a lot, because at those stakes, your goal isn't to play like a solver. Your goal is to take all of the EV that's being given to you at the table, because people are making such large mistakes in every direction that a lot of times the most GTO approach is not necessarily the best, because when you check, they're not going to bluff enough. When you bluff, they're going to call too much. There's a lot of scenarios like that. Solvers can still be really useful for looking at spots like this, because you can create like toy game experiments where, we don't need to go down too far in that respect, but the idea, you can like make your opponent super passive or super aggressive and look at responses. But if you're just looking at an equilibrium sim and not doing it the right way, I think it'll actually hinder your progress a lot of times at the lower stakes if you haven't had that guidance. So I would kind of go in like the tiered approach. It's like the first thing you want to do is make sure you're good pre-flop. And then you want to spend a lot of time watching just Plain Explains or other people that you play with, swapping Plain Explains them. Just like watch a lot of content of other winning players and get some tidbits that way. And then when you get to that point that you think you really want to dive deeper in the solver, get some access to a resource where someone kind of helps you with that, because that will make sure that part, it's important to be willing to invest some time, money, and energy in your career early, because that'll really pay dividends down the line. It might slow things down a little bit right now, but if you're doing it all wrong on your own, it's going to slow it down a lot more. So I think most people will get to a point where they want to use a solver, where they want to use just tools, however maybe then at that point, it's just really important. I know I've said this a couple times, but the idea is like, make sure that you're using them efficiently, because you can just spend hours on one spot, couple spots, and not really gain much out of it because of how nuanced it can be. So not using the tools efficiently is probably the most important thing. So if you don't know what you're doing, get some help, basically. Ruse is actually a really good tool for the people I was just talking about, the people who are less experienced with solvers. The benefit that Ruse has, A, is it's you don't need a big and like a supercomputer to run it. It's a browser-based program. The other benefit of it is they have a feature called dynamic sizing, where you can give it, usually in your, especially early in your career, you want to simplify your game as much as possible without sacrificing EV. And what Ruse will let you do is it'll give you dynamic sizing for each street. So you can, uh, say I only want one flop size, and Ruse will pick the best one size for that spot. Obviously, you don't necessarily want like 17 different flop sizes, but at least give you an idea that, like, oh, okay, on this board we prefer a medium size. On this board we prefer a bigger size, a smaller size. And this is efficient because you don't have to worry about the parameters yourself. Like the problem people get into with like something like Pio is you can have 5 flop sizes, 5 flop raises. You can, put in all of these parameters that your sim just becomes completely useless. So it's nice that when you use something like Ruse, you don't have the parameters are kind of done for you. So you have reasonable pre-flop ranges already input. You have this option to pick dynamic sizing. It's just like, okay, at equilibrium, if I was going to use one size, this is roughly what I would use. And then that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to use that size, but you at least have a starting point that's close to right, or we'll say close to GTO. And it's not like, I think at this point, people think because of solvers, everyone needs to play the exact same. Everyone needs to play the same GTO approach. I think the kind of the cool thing about it now is that you're seeing like you're never going to play against someone who's playing GTO anyways. And as you see, when you change bet sizes in a solver, it doesn't typically change the EV much, and that's assuming your opponent plays perfect, the perfect counter strategy anyways. So the kind of cool thing is solvers almost just let you use it as like a study tool for, as long as you're not being absurd. Like if the flop comes like 7-6-5 and you've raised from under the gun, you probably don't want to bet 3x pot ever, right? Like you couldn't do something like that, but you could kind of pick your own sizings in certain spots, and that is, especially if your opponent doesn't know how to play against it, then you can kind of use the tool to be like, okay, if hypothetically, the equilibrium strategy is 40%, that's what Ruse is telling me is the perfect sizing. But what happens if I decide I want to play pot and check in this spot or whatever it may be, right? So I think that's the really cool thing about some of these, especially something like Ruse that's so quick that can quickly change its bet size and like almost instantaneous, and you can see the different approach is you can know what equilibrium looks like, know what you're probably going to face versus your opponent, but then also do some tweaking and say like, okay, but if I want to play the spot slightly different, how does that affect my strategy? And then doing things like this will make it so you don't have to solve every spot, because you just start to see what's the relationship between bet size and the response. So when I bet big, how does my range change? How much less often do I bet when I bet this spot big, and how much does that affect my opponent's decision? I think those are those more general heuristics are more important, especially early in your career. Doesn't matter like what's the exact frequency I see bet bottom pair on this board, or what, or middle pair, or whatever, or gut shots, or whatever it may be. It's more important to like, okay, in general, I want to bet this size on this texture, and what does that range kind of look like as a whole, and what does my opponent's response look like as a whole. Don't worry about the people. Everyone wants to use a randomizer because they look cool, and like I want to bet the spot 67% or whatever it may be. That level of accuracy is typically not important for just about anyone. You need to be playing in very tough games where you need to be worrying about that specific range composition, because the reason that's in there is just so that your opponent, can never, weight you slightly more in any direction, or, use perfect bluff catching combos or whatever it may be. If you're playing 50 and 100 now, it's more important to just have that heuristic down pat. And these AI solvers really help with that, because you'll be able to get close to right, or at least, you don't even need to be close to GTO. You just need to be inputting a strategy that is relatively sound and your opponent can make mistakes against. So I think the solvers like Ruse really help with that.
Something like that.
I've started dabbling in PLO. So I wouldn't say I'm great. Like I make a lot of, this is typical. Anyone who goes from no limit to pot limit Omaha, usually your pre-flop is just every hand looks so pretty, right? Everything's double suited, single suited, like everything's got a flush draw or some sort of connectivity or whatever. So every hand kind of looks playable. So, but I've had like pretty decent success this year. I've started watching. There's a It's called like PLO Advanced PLO Mastery or something like that. It's on Upswing, so I've started watching that to kind of help. It's by Wiseman, so I've been watching that, and it's been helping me a little bit. But I still want to put more time into it. I'm having fun playing it, and I've had some pretty decent success this year playing PLO. But I think I'm relying too much on my just like, I don't know, in-game problem solving, right? I just get myself in a spot and I just like have to think my way out of it. Whereas in Hold'em, I kind of know where I'm going to end up. Like I have a plan for basically like on the flop. I know kind of what my strategy looks like. I know what's going to happen on turns and rivers, and like, just how that's going to affect my decision. Where in PLO, it's more like I play my hand, I get to a street, and like, crap, what do I want to do in here? What do I want to do here? And then I get to the turn, same idea. So I'm kind of having to problem solve street by street, which is not the most efficient way to play a game. So I'd like to, spend some more time to have a bit more, just like, again, be able to have more autopilot spots. I think it's really important to be able to just like know a spot and not spend too much time thinking about that, because then it allows you to spend more time thinking on the really important spots, or the spots that are, say, less common. So it's definitely a goal of mine to get a lot better at PLO this year. This year has been the year that I've played the least strict no limit hold'em 6 max of my career. I've been playing a lot more heads up and a lot more PLO this year. 6 max is still probably like 60 to 70% of my grind, but the other 30% has been like probably like 25% heads up and 5% PLO.